What if the greatest opportunity in your life was waiting for you every morning? Not in a bank. Not in a business. Not in someone else's approval. But in the quiet hour before the world woke up. Long ago, in a small town surrounded by forests and mountains, there lived a poor man named Everard. He owned almost nothing. His home was a small wooden hut with a broken door and a roof that leaked whenever it rained. Every morning, Everard woke up exhausted. And every night, he went to sleep hungry. He worked wherever people needed him. He carried heavy sacks for merchants. He cleaned stables. He chopped wood. He repaired broken carts. But no matter how hard he worked, he always seemed to remain poor. While wealthy merchants ate warm meals inside beautiful homes, Everard returned to his cold hut with only a few coins in his pocket. Sometimes he looked at the rich men walking through the marketplace and wondered, what do they have that I don't? Were they smarter? Were they stronger? Were they simply luckier? Everard didn't know. But slowly, he began believing something dangerous. He began believing that poverty was his destiny. That perhaps some people were simply born to struggle. And perhaps he was one of them. Then, one cold evening, something happened that would change his life forever. An old merchant was traveling through town when one of the wheels on his cart broke. Everyone else ignored him. But Everard stopped. He spent nearly an hour repairing the wheel. When he finished, the merchant smiled. "You have strong hands," the old man said. Everard shrugged. "Strong hands don't make a man rich." The merchant looked at him carefully. Then he invited Everard to sit beside his fire and share a meal. As they ate, the old merchant said something Everard would never forget. The king and the peasant receive the same sunrise. Everard looked confused. The merchant continued, "But the man who uses the darkness before sunrise." He paused. "Sees the daylight twice." Everard laughed softly. "What can a poor man possibly do in the dark?" The merchant smiled. "That depends on what he is willing to do." Then the old man went to sleep. But Everard couldn't. Those words kept repeating inside his mind. The man who uses the darkness before sunrise sees the daylight twice. Finally, Everard decided to test the old man's words. The next morning, he woke before the rooster. The village was completely silent. The moon still hung above the rooftops. The air was freezing. Every part of his body told him to return to bed. But Everard stood up. He wrapped himself in his old coat and walked outside. For the first time, he experienced something he had never noticed before. Silence. No merchants shouting. No customers arguing. No distractions. No one telling him what he couldn't become. There was only darkness. And his own thoughts. Everard walked toward the river. He washed his face with freezing water and sat beside the bank. He had no plan. No business. No money. But for the first time, he had something precious. Time. As he watched the river flow, he began noticing things. The empty marketplace. The broken stalls. The piles of unused wood near the forest. And suddenly, an idea appeared. He remembered the old axe sitting uselessly inside his hut. It was damaged and dull. But perhaps it could still be repaired. Everard rushed home. He sharpened the axe. Then, before the sun had even appeared, he walked into the forest. He began chopping wood. For 2 hours, he worked while everyone else slept. When the sun finally rose, Everard already had a large pile of firewood. He carried it to the marketplace. The other vendors were just arriving. Everard was already selling. A woman bought his entire pile. It wasn't a fortune. But as Everard held those coins in his hand, he felt something more valuable than money. He felt dignity. He had created something with time that everyone else had wasted. That night, Everard made a small mark on the wall of his hut. One day, tomorrow, he promised himself, there would be another. And there was. The next morning was harder. His muscles hurt. His hands were covered with blisters. The cold was worse. But he remembered yesterday. So he got up. Then he did it again. And again. And again. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Everard's morning routine became stronger than his excuses. Every morning at 5, he woke. While others slept, he worked. While others complained about the weather, he worked. While others waited for opportunity, he created it. His savings slowly grew. He bought a better axe. Then another. Soon, he realized something important. He couldn't chop enough wood alone. So he found a poor young boy who needed work. He paid him to help. Now there were 2 men working before sunrise. The amount of wood doubled. Everard hired another worker. Then another. Soon, he wasn't simply selling firewood. He was running a business. Merchants began coming directly to him. They knew Everard could deliver faster than anyone else. And slowly, the man nobody noticed became one of the most reliable traders in the town. But Everard wasn't satisfied. He remembered something he had noticed during those early mornings. There was another town 2 days away. That town had very few trees. People there desperately needed firewood. And they were willing to pay much more. So Everard took a risk. He hired more workers. He bought carts. He organized a caravan. Then, before sunrise one morning, he set out. The journey was difficult. The roads were dangerous. But when he reached the distant town, something incredible happened. The people were desperate for wood. Everard sold everything. In a single morning, he earned more money than he had ever seen in his life. He returned home with a chest filled with coins. But he didn't waste them. He reinvested them. He built a warehouse. He bought more equipment. He hired more workers. He expanded into new markets. And slowly, his business grew. Years passed. The poor man who once couldn't afford enough food now owned warehouses filled with wood. He moved his mother into a beautiful stone house with a warm fireplace. When she saw it, she cried, "I never thought we would live like this." Everard smiled. Neither had he. But he knew something others didn't. His success hadn't appeared overnight. It had been built in thousands of mornings nobody had seen. The world saw the money. It didn't see the cold mornings. The world saw the warehouse. It didn't see the lonely walks into the forest. The world saw the successful businessman. It didn't see the poor man who had once been afraid to leave his blanket. One day, many years later, the old merchant returned to the town. He was surprised to discover that the poor young man he had once met was now a wealthy and respected trader. Everard ran toward him. "You changed my life," he said. The old merchant shook his head. "No. I only gave you a sentence. You gave yourself the discipline." Everard smiled. And suddenly, he understood. The secret had never been 5 o'clock. The secret was what 5 o'clock represented. It represented choosing yourself before the world demanded your attention. It represented using the quiet hours to think before the noise began. It represented doing the difficult thing before your excuses had time to speak. Anyone can work when everyone is watching. But real transformation often happens when nobody is watching. Years later, Everard became an old man. One morning, his grandchildren asked him, "Grandfather, what is the secret to becoming successful?" Everard pointed toward the window. Outside, the world was still dark. "Do you see that?" The children nodded. "That's where I found everything I ever wanted." One grandson looked confused. "But grandfather, it's dark." Everard laughed. "Exactly. The darkness is not your enemy. If you have a purpose, darkness becomes your quietest advantage." He took the boy's hand and walked toward the river. The same river where Everard had once washed his face as a poor, hopeless man. They stood there together and watched the first light appear over the horizon. Everard smiled. He had spent his life chasing success. But eventually, he discovered something deeper. Success wasn't created in one giant moment. It was created in small decisions repeated every day. One early morning. One difficult choice. 1 hour of focused work. One promise kept. Then another. And another. Until those small moments became a completely different life. You don't need to become a different person tomorrow. You only need to win the first hour. Wake up before the noise. Before the messages. Before the distractions. Before the world tells you what you should do. Use that quiet time to learn. To plan. To exercise. To build. To pray. To create. To think. Because the world may give everyone the same 24 hours. But not everyone uses them the same way. Some people spend their mornings reacting to life. Others use their mornings to shape it. Some wake up and ask, "What do I have to do today?" Others wake up and ask, "What can I build today?" That difference may seem small, but repeated for years, it can change everything. Everard wasn't born rich. He wasn't chosen by fate. He didn't possess some magical secret. He simply stopped giving his best hours away. And once he took control of those hours, he began taking control of his life. So tomorrow morning, when your alarm rings and your mind tells you, just 5 more minutes, remember Everard. Remember the darkness. Remember the quiet. And remember this. Asterisk asterisk your future may be built in the hours that nobody else wants. Asterisk asterisk. The world can wait. Your dreams cannot. Wake up. Start early. Use the silence. And begin building the life you keep saying you want. Because sometimes, the difference between the life you have and the life you dream about is simply what you choose to do before the sun comes up. If this story inspired you, subscribe for more powerful stories about discipline, courage, and changing your life one decision at a time. And tell us in the comments, what will you do with your first hour tomorrow? Your destiny doesn't begin someday. It begins with the next choice you make. And perhaps, tomorrow morning, that choice will be made in the dark.